This podcast is recorded on stolen and unceded Aboriginal land.
We acknowledge the First Nations and elders of this country, and we join their calls for justice.
The reviews are in. What did you think of my comedy, Emerald Moon? Thumbs up, thumbs down.
Well, maybe instead of using my review, we should just consider what my father said about the show that I brought him to, Tom Ballard comedy show. We standing outside and I was like, what did you think? And he was like, yeah, was that his first time? What are you in Brunswick Heads? No, like doing comedy.
Just kicking off with a nice little work in progress show, $35 tickets. Just try, give it a go, see what's going to happen.
Yeah, my dad goes, was that his first time? My mum delivered like a brutal, I don't know if it was a heckle. It was just her response to Tom asking, have you ever ordered McDonald's on Uber Eats? And my mum goes, no.
It really was guttural. It sort of came from her soul. That was quite good.
I think she even was like, I don't know where that came from. I mean, partly it came from the fact that there's no Uber Eats in Brunswick Heads where you were doing the show. So
I should have done my research.
Little bit silly. We were, we held you to account in that audience, I feel.
Fucking hell. The fact checkers of Brunswick Heads were out in force. I do a joke where I say, Australia, we're not a real country, as I go on to, do more punchlines based on that premise. And I just said, Australia's not a real country. And a woman just said, we are.
We are?
Oh, yeah. Great. Okay, yeah. I'm sorry. My mistake. I made a terrible mistake.
You're trying to transition seamlessly into a joke about the carbon footprint. And you ask someone in the front row, do you know your carbon footprint? She's like, yes.
Yes, minus 2,000. Fucking hippies, all of you. You don't deserve my first comedy gig. Thanks for coming. Anyway.
Very cute photograph of Tom, me, my dad, my mum, just taken by my little sister on the Instagram now at Serious Danger AU. If you want to go and have a look, you may get an understanding of where my physical stature comes from, seeing my lovely little dad. I told Dad was also like, how do you know this person? I was like, I do a podcast with him. You do a podcast? Yes, Papa.
Yes.
I told him to listen. Maybe he's listening. I hope so.
What's his name again? Sorry?
Jeff.
Hey, Jeff. Good on you, Jeff.
I bet he's not listening.
Okay, great. Well, we've got you, and you're basically Jeff in a wig, so it's fine.
This is true. No Strong James.
The Greens bring such idiocy. They are not interested in the facts. I wonder if any of them have read any history outside the kind of green activist history from the inner Melbourne suburbs.
Frankly, I've always found the Greens to be a real serious danger to Australia.
Serious danger to Australia.
Hey, this is Serious Danger, a podcast about green politics in Australia. You know it, you love it. It's not an official Greens Party podcast. We're back. We're making news. So I was away. There were 2 women running the show last week. It was fucking wild.
Yeah.
Don't worry, everyone. The man has returned.
Sorry about that. We've got that male balance here to keep our emotions in check. Won't be suffering any bouts of female hysteria, I hope, during this episode.
Damn right. This is made possible with the help of the Green Institute and produced by Michael the Griffin. This week we are discussing the tragic passing and the life and times of Liberal Senator Jim Molan, RIP, and head of Invasion Day 2023. We're going to be joined by the host of the podcast Frontier War Stories, Gumilla Ray and Kuma man Boe Spearim. He's going to be joining us on the program.
Mm-hmm. We have new patrons since last week's episode, Claire, Bonnie and Frith, and of course a big shout out to Nick, who edited his pledge from $3 to $4.20. Nice. You can support the show on Patreon. Just $3 a month. That's all we ask. It does make a big difference. If you're thinking, this year, what can I do to support independent coverage of what is happening in Australia politics that actually talks about radical left solutions and is willing to criticize the centrist bullshit that we are fed by most mainstream media outlets? If you want to do that, just support the show and pay Mike, our producer. SeriousDangerPod.com has all the details. Please also follow us on the social medias at SeriousDangerAU. Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, YouTube.
That's the one. For all your info, you can go to SeriousDangerPod.com.
I said that.
For all your Serious Danger needs. Oh, you did? Sorry. Okay.
Yeah.
My bad. Sorry, I'm a bit rusty. It's been a while.
Yes.
A song for that right-wing fuckwit Senator Jim Molan by Mike Carlton on Twitter, 2018. He is the very model of a liberal major general, to the right of Genghis Khan in matters spiritual and temporal. He fears those evil Muslims are becoming far too populous. He spouts the arrant drivel of that Milo Yiannopoulos. His political opinions are vapid and ephemeral, but he's the very model of a liberal major general. Liberal.
My brain's all over the place. It's been such a tough week. You know, we're all in mourning because former Major General, Liberal Senator Jim Molan from New South Wales lost his battle with cancer at the age of 72, passed away. We've lost the Nazi Pope, we've lost George Pell, and now we've lost Jimbo. Where were you when you heard the news, Emerald Moon?
Don't remember. Probably the gym. I'm usually in the gym when I hear about people dying because you get the early morning news bulletin and I'm just pumping weights.
And how did it make you feel?
Unamused, ambivalent. I don't.
Neutral.
It didn't affect my life. I would have checked my phone and then been like, oh, my minute 30 of rest is over. Time to humiliate myself trying to do pull-ups.
Back to working out so I don't die.
Yeah, exactly.
How familiar were you with Jim Molan, the man, the legend?
Not actually very familiar. I think you're more familiar than me. I have a basic picture. I didn't feel like I needed to know much more, but I'm going to learn more, I think, in this episode. I knew he did bad things in war.
Correct.
Bad man.
I think it'd be fair to say that, you know, cancer is terrible and anyone dying at 72 is bad, and it would be very sad for his family and obviously for his friends and people who know him, etc., etc., etc. I don't think that him dying is a victory for the left and we don't need to dance on his grave or anything.
Yeah.
But certainly I think the reaction from the political and media class went a whole lot further than just not celebrating his death. Peter Dutton said he was a patriot, a great defender of our country. Defence Minister Richard Marles said he was an honourable and gracious man who had been a fierce advocate for our nation. Anthony Albanese described him as a man of principle and a politician of conviction. This is a recurring theme. It was just like, this motherfucker believed in what he believed and said it really like loudly and forcefully and never backed down from his beliefs, which is a problem if your beliefs are dog shit. But
yeah,
you know, that's just my thoughts.
Actually not good in that case.
And even our very own Green Senate leader and former Serious Danger guest, Larissa Waters.
Former crush.
She tweeted, Vale Senator Jim Molan, on behalf of the Greens Senate team, our heartfelt condolences to his family, friends, and all those grieving his loss. Despite our philosophical differences, his ethic of service has our respect. Emerald, was this a rare posting fail from our problematic fave, Larissa Water?
I think, look, we all make mistakes. We are maybe more prone to making mistakes when it's January and we might be on leave or like just returning from leave. Maybe there are fewer people on deck to have conversations about whether to post about the war criminal who you happen to work with who just died. I also think that everyone fucking overthinks this stuff and they're like, what should we post? What should our reaction be? What should we do? What are they going to do if we do nothing? And I'm like, it does not matter. You do not need to do anything. It's not your role. Like, as a politician, you're trying to as a Greens politician, you're trying to make material differences in people's lives and save the world from climate change. You need to make decisions on that basis. Is it going to do that? Is it going to have any political gain? Tweeting about Jim Molan? Nah.
Yeah. Do nothing would be your prescription in these particular circumstances?
Yes. If you happen to come across his immediate family or something, you might want to offer your condolences IRL. You don't need to post.
Never post.
That's the rule.
I think it's the big sticking point, a problem with the wall-to-wall hagiography, just unquestioning celebration of this guy and his legacy. Not just like him, he was a nice guy or whatever. It's like, no, his service and his career and all the things that he did, like literally identifying the legacy of Jim Molan, and we've got nothing to report here but good news. That's how fucked it is. So
you mean the philosophical differences?
Which she clearly means, during the Senate debate. And I'm sure she crossed paths with him, yes, as an individual, and they had fights on the Senate floor about certain, which you could describe as philosophical differences, but it completely ignores and is blind to Jim Molan's career and his history of overseeing, being extremely close to potentially, you could argue in a court of law, committing
Allegedly.
what we would consider allegedly war crimes. I mean, he can't sue us anymore for
True.
defamation, and you can't defame the dead. So there you go.
Not alleged. Alleged by us.
Because it's true.
Proven.
I think, very quickly for people who aren't aware, let's talk about this guy's actual
like me. Tell me.
history. I'll give you the lowdown. He served in the military for 40 years. He served in Indonesia and East Timor. Most famously, he was the Coalition Forces Chief of Operations from 2004 to 2006 in Iraq, the Iraq War, the notoriously successful and good Iraq War.
That sounds pretty high up. I'm not familiar with the military hierarchy, but that sounds high.
Big cheese. Like, it's actually extraordinary how much influence he had. He oversaw the bombing campaigns of the cities Najaf and Samarra and commanded Operation Fury, which was the brutal leveling of the city of Fallujah. Coalition forces bombed Fallujah to try and wipe out Iraqi resistance fighters. So these are people who, their country is invaded and occupied by the US. They have the gall to try and resist that in some way. And, of course, they need to be taken care of with fuckloads of bombs.
Yeah.
When the bombing began, the city was still home to more than 30,000 civilians. Many of them were prevented from fleeing. Others were simply too old or infirm to get out of the city. Coalition forces sealed off all the routes out of Fallujah once the bombing began. And remember, during these times, like, if you were just a dude aged between 15 and 55, no matter what you did or what you believed or what you were involved in, you were just an enemy combatant, right? So all these, US attacks, drone strikes, when they kill enemy combatants, they mean, we killed a man who was aged between 15 and 55. Therefore, it's all legitimate and it's all
isn't
good.
that exactly what the Greens are all about, hating middle-aged men? That's a take.
Australia's involvement in Iraq War. Jim Molan was doing what Clementine Ford wanted, killing all men.
Yeah. This is the end result.
They cut off water and electricity to the city during Fallujah. Aid agencies were denied access to deliver basic humanitarian need. They seized Fallujah's only hospital. 2 medical centers were bombed. There are reports of American snipers shooting at ambulances, which is a war crime under the Geneva Convention. The whole city was declared a weapons-free zone. I only learned about this researching this. That meant that you can shoot anyone for any reason.
How does weapons-free zone mean that?
I guess your weapons are free to do what you will with your weapons. And basically, if you see anyone, you suspect anyone,
sounds like.
shoot away.
Someone tells me something is gluten-free, they're like, which means we can put as much gluten as we want in there. What?
Slightly different.
Okay.
Coalition forces were also found to be, and this is all reported at the time, to be using white phosphorus. That's a chemical weapon. It rapidly eats away at the skin, flesh and bone of anyone who comes into contact with it. The use of that against civilians is illegal under the Geneva Convention. And it is because of these fucking horrific facts that people often referred to Mullen as the Butcher of Fallujah and said, that guy either has questions to answer, re the war crimes that he oversaw while he was in charge, or is just a straight up war criminal, which... I don't know, reading over the research, it seems fair enough to at least talk about it in a very general sense, that you could use the WC word.
Seems like an accurate adjective.
I mean, I think it's tricky because, like, if you say war crimes, you're probably talking about, like, there is a specific legal definition and people need to go through the International Criminal Court in order to be found guilty of war crimes, right? So there is, like, this very legal, like, specific legal understanding of which Jim Molan was never put on trial or found guilty of. But he was heavily involved in the Iraq War and the whole fucking thing was a crime based on a lie and was illegal.
Well, yes, and anyone who's ever listened, speaking of my dad, I hope he's listening. My dad had this Bob Dylan songbook when I was little, and a lot of the time that I can remember growing up with my dad as a very young child is him playing the guitar and singing Bob Dylan songs. And in particular, we used to sing Masters of War together, me as a very young child. That is, the idea that the people on whom to focus in the perpetration of, like, horrendous acts of war and war crimes are the like the soldiers who directly delivered those, those acts is a little bit silly.
In terms of, like, we should focus on the military brass and the people who's, like, who are in control, the people at the top
who are in control,
of the
a little bit further up the
yes.
chain. I mean, in this case, it's even it's not as far removed as some of the people that you would argue should be held to account for this, such as the politicians who are making the orders, or even the corporations who are responsible for, delivering the arms or controlling those politicians. But the idea that you can be like, well, he's not a war crime because maybe he hasn't been shown to have directly been the person who shot this unarmed civilian is like, I think it's silly, as I said.
Well, no, yeah, he totally, it was his idea, and that's the thing that he celebrated for these campaigns. Yeah.
Yeah.
And also, he loves that in reaction to the Brereton report and the actions of individual soldiers in Afghanistan, he was at pains to say this wasn't on the battlefield, okay? There were laws on the battlefield. All this stuff was off the battlefield, and then trying to push some real, bad apples bullshit of like, oh, they're just some soldiers out there in this horrible, bloody, illegal war who just really get carried away and they really forget themselves.
Such a shame.
Mullen also just like never backed down, of course, and had no regrets whatsoever about fucking anything. At all, about the war itself, about the reasons for going there. This is him writing in 2013. This is amazing. Was the Iraq War worth it? Probably a nugatory question.
Nugatory? What the fuck does that mean?
Nugatory question, a meaningless question or a useless question, I think. Yeah. Are we going to say that up to a certain number of dead, the war would have been worth it? What is that number then? Some say that more than 100,000 Iraqis were killed in the war, and there are still some ideologues who believe the 2005 to 2006 account in The Lancet of 1 million killed. Now, it is quite hard to figure out the exact death toll, and The Lancet death toll of 1 million has been called into question, but I'll tell you, it's way more than 100,000, motherfucker. Like, all the decent estimates definitely put the death toll at way higher than 100,000, so it's real bad. If you insist on asking was it worth it, you should really have some casualty figure of your own that makes it a worthwhile war or not. Many that ask me this question...
No. What a fucking straw man argument.
Many that ask me this question don't believe anyone should die in any war. Okay. And so force should never be used. If that is the case, we share no common ground, as I believe that in certain circumstances, the use of force is legitimate and can be wise, and then casualties are inevitable. If you continue to insist on simplistic questions, you should also be able to say what might have happened had the conflict not occurred. How many might have died had Saddam Hussein stayed? Did you ever think about that, Emerald?
Go on.
I mean, many say that remember that the final report on WMD did conclude that Saddam intended to restart the weapons of mass destruction program as soon as sanctions were removed. Saddam calls it a war with Iran that cost 1 million lives. I mean, think of all the lives that we saved by killing hundreds of thousands of people.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Many say that the war was based on a lie because there was no WMD. For it to be a lie, there must be an intention to deceive. There is probably more evidence to suggest that it was an error, a mistake, a stuff-up, than an indication of an outright lie put out by evil neocons. It is pushing the bounds of credibility to state unequivocally that this was a war based on a lie. What is in fact is that one of the justifications for the war turned out to be wrong.
Wow, I knew this guy was bad. I didn't know what a fucking punisher he was. And if I had to listen to this man in my workplace, there is no way I would be tweeting like RIP when he died.
I've got some fucking philosophical differences, I tell you.
Be less annoying.
What the veneration of this guy to me, like going through this research, is like just tells you so much you need to know about how we our relationship to the war on terror and the actual cost of our involvement in Iraq and Afghanistan. It's just like we're not allowed to talk about it, question it, think about it. It's all good. Anyone who served there is a genius, and anyone who did anything bad is an outlier and not indicative of anything. I mean, is that still where we're fucking at, 2 decades on from the miserable, horrific failure that was the war on terror?
Wasn't it the biggest maybe it's now been subsumed by the climate protests? The protest against the Iraq War was the biggest protest in Australian history. Previously, I don't know if that's now been surpassed. Like, even at the time, that was the view. And I think surely now that there would be even more, like, anti-Iraq War sentiment among the Australian public. But I'm just a lefty. What would I know?
Amongst the public, sorry, yes, I should reframe that in terms of the political and medial class. These same people who are sucking Jim Molan's dick in death.
Yeah,
the inability to reckon with any of it or to dismiss and just brush away the horrific crimes that were committed at the hands of the West and our coalition forces in those places of the world based on a lie, a legal war that led to the destabilization of the region, the rise of ISIS, and like the blood that is on the hands of everyone from John Howard to George W. Bush. Like, still, the people in the political class don't fucking get it. And then Jim Molan is still out there saying, hey, we need to do more war at China, everyone. Absolute warmonger, just always his solution to everything. More troops, more money for defense, blood, 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 guns, 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 boom, boom, boom. I did nothing wrong.
Yeah.
Which I almost think pushes me to the point where I'm like, well, I actually think that because everyone is ignoring this in the political and media commentariat when Jim Molan dies, I think there is value for left-wing voices and Greens, the actual left-wing party in this country, to actually say something that is critical.
When he dies?
Yes. I mean,
Interesting.
otherwise,
So what would you have
just,
tweeted if you were running the social media account of a Greens MP? What would you have tweeted?
I'd be like,
This is going to be good.
sucked in, Jimmy boy. He's fucking dead.
Right.
Lol. No.
On behalf of the Senate team.
We had philosophical differences. Well, I mean, we talked off air about Marine Fruki's tweet about the Queen. I mean, this is a political moment. This has political ramifications. The way we talk about the Queen as an institution, the royal family as an institution, and her dying, in contrast to all the glorification and hagiography, like there is some value to that, to sort of say, no,
Right.
you know, Jim Molan has died. That is sad for him and his family and his friends. Condolences to them on a personal level. But we need to reckon with the legacy of Jim Molan as a public figure, as a political figure, as a military figure, because we still have not actually reckoned with Australia's involvement in Iraq or Afghanistan or our investment in the war on terror, which is still a very shameful period in this country's history.
I see what you mean then, that because of the outpouring from the political and media class of like Valet Jim Molan, then it's important that we be an opposing force. Like I kind of get that, but at the same time, I just don't know if it's worth it when, we know that the only coverage that will get, like no one will pay any fucking attention to the political point that we're trying to make in that instance. They will just have a go at us. And surely it's like, well, just at every possible instance, we should be advancing that political perspective in and out of Parliament as a party. Like I'm just still not convinced that you need to do the tweeting because I just learned that they died thing. I'm just this could even just be like a personal thing. I think even, when someone dies, if you weren't close with them, why do you need to post? What about your ego is like, people need to hear from me right now. I never really, I don't understand that. But I think, the conversation that we had about the Marine thing is I'm like, if you think it is absolutely essential to post, and primarily that would be justified because the Queen dying has had real world implications, like it could be an inflection point for the monarchy and, you know, the push for a republic in Australia, that maybe that is an important point for political intervention. I just don't know that Jim Molan dying is an inflection point for our military approach, you know, in Australian of the Australian government or the Australian state, which is why I'm like, do we need to tweet that he died?
It's interesting. Like, look at the response to George Pell dying, you know, and I think it was actually quite remarkable across a lot of the media. You know, some outlets went to the victims, right? And that feels like a change. Like we've got comments from, you know, the usual figures about how great George Pell was, but like there was a real investment in, okay, this guy dies. What does his life and legacy in full mean? You know, let's have a think about the people that suffered at the hands of an institution that he vigorously defended and fucked over, you know, throughout his life. So.
And what does that say about the strength of the church as an institution versus like the Australian military and state as an institution or the monarchy as an institution?
Right. Very quickly, some other reasons to hate Jim Molan. He was Tony Evans' special envoy on Operation Sovereign Borders, which he said was a policy success and something that every Australian should be extremely proud of. Fuck off, cunt.
And they're saying that now maybe Tony is one of the options to replace him in the Senate. I haven't really been following this. Or is that just a meme?
Apparently, there is serious word that Tony Abbott is keen to re-enter public life. The pre-selection won't happen until after the March state election. So we've still got a little bit of time. Catherine Deves' name has also been thrown around to replace Senator Jim Molan.
Wow, a star-studded cast of a pre-selection ticket. Can't wait to see it.
Jim Molan loved a bit of climate doubt and denial. He said on Q&A that his mind was open about whether human activity was causing climate change.
Open as in just like an empty space? Like
It's open for business. Come on in, crazy ideas.
There's literally tumbleweeds, you know, rolling through, wide open.
You know, you should keep an open mind, but not so open that your brain falls out.
Yep.
That same year, he walked out of the Senate rather than joining his Liberal colleagues to block debate on Pauline Hanson's All Lives Matter motion because he thought that it was important that senators should be able to express their views on that particular question. And finally, and this is when Molan v. the Greens sort of really got cooking, back in 2018, we found out that Jim Molan had shared 2 videos on his social media from Britain First, the white supremacist far-right organisation. One of the videos was titled Muslim Thugs Beat Girl in Holland. It had been completely debunked and was bullshit. This was clearly, you know, racist, anti-Islamic nonsense. Someone when he posted that video, someone commented on it, charming, and we're meant to be tolerant, accepting, and welcoming of this breed in our country, to which Mullen replied, unbelievable. That was his response to that.
Replied to the unbelievable. Yeah. Maybe he thought that the comment was unbelievably racist?
Unbelievable. Nah. People got outraged, and he said he didn't apologize. He said it was unwise to repost the two videos because they allowed my political opponents to misrepresent me.
I apologize for giving you an opportunity to be shit. No, I'm really sorry that I did that because it allowed you to be a lying liar.
Got him. Of course, I'm not racist nor anti-Islam. I do not support Britain First. I'm anti-violence. You're in the military. You did Fallujah. I'm anti-violence and anti-civil disturbance. I am part of the most successful multicultural nation on earth. I'm proud of that. No apologies, no regrets.
Isn't that what the US says?
I put my life on the line for Islamic countries. For people to come out now and say that this is racist or is anti-Islamic, I find deeply offensive.
Oh, he's offended. I'm sorry.
Which then, that's what prompted Richard Di Natale in Parliament to sort of talk about Mullen's record in Fallujah and sort of say, you know, the war crimes going down, you were involved. He did that in Parliament. Then Adam Bant, outside of Parliament, sort of repeated it and said, yeah, if there was an independent inquiry into this, Jim Molan could be up for prosecution. And he says that outside of Parliament, away from parliamentary privilege, Jim Molan threatens defamation. And then Adam has to apologise twice, okay? Now, this is his first apology. He released a statement saying, yesterday I made statements about Senator Jim Molan on Sky TV. I hereby apologise for those statements. And that was it.
Okay. Yep.
And that wasn't good enough.
That wasn't good enough?
That wasn't good enough. So we had to do, and Jim Molan said, I still might sue you for defamation. So Adam had to go again and say, I sincerely apologise and express my regret to Senator Mullen and to those who have served in Australia's operational theatres and to their families and friends who are offended by my comments. I propose to make a donation to a veterans organisation as an expression of my sincerity over this issue.
Sure.
Sure, why not?
Veterans are not like fucking well looked after in this country. That's a thing. That's
totally fine. They're all worn out from doing war crimes.
Tom.
I'm sorry, that's not true. That's not true. Veterans are victims of the imperial capitalist state as well. Okay. Okay, so in summary, Jim Molan is very, very bad. The fact that he died of cancer at 72 is sad for his family and people who know him, but he is still a political figure and his legacy should be talked about and questioned, and we still absolutely need to reckon with the fucked up shit that we did throughout the war and terror. And I don't know, I guess we'll brace ourselves. I just always think about what's going to happen when John Howard dies. It's going to be just wall-to-wall horror. It's going to be the most painful and annoying couple of weeks of our entire lives.
You know that Labor's going to be like, gun laws, though.
Gun laws?
Gun laws?
I mean, you know, Iraq. But yes, also gun laws.
Gun laws.
So.
Yeah. This week we have Boe Spearim on the show. Boe is a Gamilaroi and Cooma man. He's a podcaster and also an organiser with the Warriors of the Aboriginal Resistance or War in Meanjin, Brisbane. Thanks for coming on the show, Boe.
All good. Thanks for having us.
Well, we were keen to have you on in particular. Obviously, folks would all know Invasion Day is coming up. It's the 26th of January, next Thursday. And you are pretty much every year, as I understand it, you're kind of involved in the local organising of rallies and protests against the celebration of genocide on the 26th of January and just generally, you know, a bit of a call for justice for Aboriginal people. How long have you been involved in that organising?
I'd say actively 9 years.
Yeah.
Last year would have been the first year that I didn't because I had been COVID. So I spent that whole week at home isolating, but attending over 20 years.
Yeah.
Especially here in Brizzy. We always, there was always a very solid core sort of group here in Brisbane. And after 2012, the 40th anniversary of the 10 Embassy in Canberra, that's when things sort of started to expand and get much bigger. And then that's when sort of organising, I started getting involved in organising up here. So 2012 onwards.
Yeah.
I remember clearly 2012, a lot of mob like from around the country went down to Canberra, and we had one of the local organising groups up here organise Invasion Day, and it just didn't like rub a lot of us right.
Yeah.
That's just sort of the mob organising that day. So we made it thing the following year to sort of hit the ground running, and we had a lot of momentum as well because in 2012 we set up the Tent Embassy in Musgrave Park. And that was around March. Then by April, May 16th, about 250 cops came in, shut the whole of South Brisbane down. And it was crazy. It was like, I always remember it was like Star Wars, like the troops walking down, like literally you can hear the footsteps walking down the side of inside of Musgrave Park. And then you had like the sergeants like up there, the shoulders crossed. And then the negotiators in the embassy with us, sort of, arguing with us, and then they just like snatched us up like one by one.
Yeah.
And then like after that, like we grew quite a bit of momentum, and so like the actions, the gatherings, the meetings that we had really inspired War to sort of start doing our own things and sort of, being a collective organisation for young Aboriginal people.
Yeah. Because for folks who don't know now in Brisbane, there's like, Musgrave Park. Next to it, there's Yagara Hall, and that's where like a lot of Aboriginal events will kind of culminate. Like the rally on 26th January always ends in Musgrave Park, and there's a big barbecue and, smoking ceremony and speakers and all of that. I'm curious, so I get the sense as well that War in Brisbane, in Manjin, and like the Brisbane Blacks are quite radical, often like kind of leading the country in a lot of ways and like calling to abolish the date before, when other people were still calling to change the date. What are the key demands this year when we're going to be marching next week?
Definitely, yeah. So, there's this whole push, from mainstream and sort of different pockets of sort of our society to have, an alternative voice to Parliament, a voice to Parliament, and sort of really hype up this conversation around constitutional change, which has been around for like the last 12 years. And I think successfully, grassroots activism has really sort of put the nail, in the coffin in regards to, the debate around sort of constitutional reform or recognition. It started with the Recognise campaign. Actually, like this whole thing around constitutional recognition started with John Howard back in 2007, when him and Kevin Rudd were sort of having a debate about who wants to be sort of Prime Minister and who can do best for Aboriginal people. Do you want an apology or do you want, constitutional reform or change? So, that's how long the sort of discussion's been around for. But at the moment, it's been a real push to sort of understand and hear what other voices are out there and what other sort of stories are out there and alternative sort of avenues we can go down. And there's a lot, there's a lot out there. Michael Mansell in Tasmania has this concept called the Seventh State. He wrote a book about it, which I recommend a lot of non-Indigenous people to sort of look that up and get that. He's an Aboriginal lawyer from down Tassie, been an activist for, 40, 50 years. He's a part of he's what actually created the Aboriginal passport, flew to Libya, back in the late 80s to, get funding from Colonel Gaddafi, who was funding revolutionary movements around the world at the time as well, like train the ANC in guerrilla warfare tactics. Very interesting. There's, the conversation around, a black parliament, what that would look like. There's conversations around, treaty as well. Like there's a lot of things out there, republic, independence. There's a lot of alternative discussions, plus we have the opportunity to sort of look further outside of where we are and around the world to look at places like Aotearoa, Turtle Islands, in regards to relationships and sort of furthering sort of our demands or our sort of conversations with sort of state and federal governments as well. Like we know sort of the route that treaty takes and the longevity that it takes, those things to be equal or those things to be acknowledged as well. Treaty has been a long conversation in this country. There was a real big push back in the 80s. I think it's sort of starting to get revamped at the moment. because it has that sort of equal sort of, I guess, people understand that, people know that, and it's more tangible sort of discuss that than sort of, like understand sort of, it's taken a while, I think, for the discussion around sovereignty to sort of hit home in sort of not just the Aboriginal community, but in the broader community as well. And I know that treaty has sort of sit well amongst Aboriginal people because it's sort of been something that, our old people have sort of discussed as well. And, I think we're sitting in a really good position in regards to if it is, treaty or if it is a seven state or if it is something else that Aboriginal people want to discuss, we're like the only sort of Commonwealth nation and not to have sort of some kind of formal agreement as well. So, we're not in the position that New Zealand or Canada is in, or certain parts of America as well, that we can sort of have, a more, hopefully more meaningful dialogue. But then again, anything meaningful from this country at the moment has, if anything, it's just been a nightmare.
Yeah.
In regards to response.
Yeah. So a lot of the kind of the posters and things that you had been tweeting about next Thursday's protest will using the hashtag Treaty Before Voice, which obviously is also, that's a big debate that's kind of been happening with the Greens taking that position that we want truth and treaty and voice in that order as opposed to, voice first.
Definitely. And I think the thing as well, we need to go as radical as possible, when we talk about these things. What do we want in the treaty? First we've got to understand, what's in a voice, What does the voice of Parliament mean? It means an enshrined body in the Constitution, but, it's at the whim of whoever's at power. It's a toothless tiger at the end of the day where, conservative, or you could be as conservative or as radical as you can be, but, whoever that Prime Minister is, you get to pick those individuals within that group. Now, one thing to understand is we've always had advisory bodies. Under the last few PMs, we've had advisory bodies to the Prime Minister. We've had, things like ATSIC. We've had many different sort of forms of these bodies dating back to the 70s as well. So we know that these things haven't worked because they haven't been on the terms of Aboriginal and Torres Strait people. And those, ADSIC wasn't the be all and end all, but it was a self-funded organization that was doing a whole lot in different parts of the country, funding a lot of community programs as well as sort of national sort of movements. I remember, you look at the themes for NAIDOC around ADSIC time, they were very radical.
Yeah.
Stop Black Deaths in Custody, the Bringing Them Home report, they were really talking about, really radical issues and bringing it to the forefront. And you look at nowadays, sadly to say, a lot of the NAIDOC events have been co-opted by military slogans, police, mining companies, these really sort of far-right sort of thinking or oppressive organizations that, don't necessarily have, the Aboriginal Torres Strait community in their best interest as well. So I think when we're talking about treaty, we go as radical, and if I was somebody in a position to sort of say, hey, this is what I want, I'd say before we have any kind of discussion, we need to be on some sort of equal playing form, we need to have, reparations. We need 3% at least or 10% of the yearly revenue sort of, we're giving out to Aboriginal people. We need land given back, land that's already owned, whether it's freehold land, native title land, certain parts of national parks that go on significant sites as well. We need a halt to sort of mining companies destroying land as well. At the moment, for my mob, the Native Title Tribunal here up this way just gave the green light for Santos to drill 850 gas wells into the Pilliga as well. So, I think we, need to put more into the bucket than less, because we're coming from an unequal sort of position anyways. We're the ones sort of scratching at the bucket to sort of, or at the door to try and get in for a conversation. So I think if momentum continues to build as it is on the 26th of January, I think things will get closer to that. I don't think anytime soon there'll be, a call for treaty or, and that's why they're sort of trying to really push this voice to Parliament. It's always been a distraction, this conversation, to sort of get us away from the real things that are happening, the real conversation that are happening, or the real conversation that we need to have, but also the conversations that are happening in community as well.
That's really interesting, Boe. I'm interested in your relationship to the campaign, though. I mean, let's assume that this referendum is going to go ahead. Linda Burney, Indigenous ministers, come out with more detail. If it all gets passed, if Labor has the numbers to honour the commitment that they're elected on to happen in potentially August. I'm just interested in how you think the more radical section of Aboriginal politics in this country might relate to that campaign. Whether you would abstain, invest, particularly in yes or no, or how would you feel about that campaign playing out this year?
Well, this is the funny thing. Like, this is the conversation that we've been having for years, for the last 10 years. If there's a vote in regards to changing the constitution, this is how it's going to look. Mob who are for it are going to vote. You're going to have your well-meaning white people that are going to vote for it. You're going to have your radical mob going to vote no. And you know who else is going to vote no? All the racists. So it's going to look very, very funny. You know what I mean? And, like once there's this is the thing, like, it's a multi-million-dollar campaign to begin with, and it's a campaign that's been funded or supported by, corporations like Rio Tinto, and we know the history in Aboriginal communities. And, we know that when they had the Uluru gathering, all those years ago, that there was a section of the mob who were invited that walked down and that pretty much abstained, or not abstained, but just disagreed with what was happening, and were sort of bullied into the position of not really being allowed to sort of or being bullied to the point where they walked out of the room, not being heard, not being listened to properly, But we don't hear these things as well. There was a huge, not a huge, but there was quite a significant number of mob that walked out. Sister Lydia was one of those ones that walked out.
Yeah.
And if you have a chat to her, she'll sort of, reinforce sort of what happened on that day as well. Her sister Mariki, who's heavily involved in the war, was there as well. Auntie Jenny Munro, who's been a long time advocate and activist, for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people since she's like 17 years old. Back in the old days at the embassy, it's like these things haven't even been heard of, or don't get said, and. It's like we've been up against, the 8 Ball since the beginning of this. One thing that we used to do back in the day, like we'd go to the All-Stars games because, they had the red R on their shoulder, like for the Recognise campaign, and we'd hand out flyers, at the front of the game. Like that's how we've been able to sort of push this sort of back, and they've had to sort of switch and change how they sort of, want to add Aboriginal people to the Constitution or create this new body that will eventually sort of have not as much power as well. In regards to voting, that's how it'll play out. The funny thing about it, I know like a lot of mob that will vote yes, and I know a lot of mob that will vote no if when it comes to that time as well. I know a lot of people actually in the campaign who are heading up it. Like I'm very familiar with Brother Tom. He's an amazing unionist. His background and in supporting our campaign to stop Santos. And then on the other hand, he's running this national campaign to sort of that I disagree with, and he knows that I disagree with it as well. And we've had many conversations, over the time as well, over the last couple of years about it as well. So it's definitely a funny thing. We're going to do as much as possible to sort of stall or even hijack this campaign to show that there are more conversations out there that need to be heard. And even if this thing gets up, it's not going to drastically or radically change this nation. Like a voice to parliament isn't going to change institutional racism, which is the root cause of the demise and the destruction of sort of our communities and what plagues, us in regards to kids being stolen and our mob dying in custody. Like, that's what we want to change in this nation is institutional racism, which when we talk about sort of frontier wars and when we talk about the sort of colonial legacy that exists today, institutions that came from England that existed, in the sort of early days of sort of the formation of New South Wales and then sort of later Australia are the same institutions that exist today.
Yeah, and I wanted to talk a little bit about the Frontier Wars because obviously you do a podcast, have done a podcast for a while now called Frontier War Stories, which kind of challenges that denial of Frontier Wars, a denial of the idea that there was organised Aboriginal resistance to a military invasion and a war.
Mm-hmm.
And you talk about, like, a lot of the time the Frontier Wars is kind of defined as a period between 1788 until the 1930s. But I know there's also an argument that that war is ongoing, like that war hasn't ended, which I think is a really interesting idea. Like, are you able to talk a little bit more about that?
Definitely. Well, like one of the things that we're running with in regards to the campaign for Invasion Day and onwards is Treaty Before Voice and the war. You know, so we're still sort of keeping this conversation rolling as well, and it's looking at sort of institutions that exist today, that impact on Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. As early as like 1852, I think it was, in New South Wales, they were investigating Aboriginal people dying in custody. They were really looking at sort of why mob were coming into custody and weeks later dying. There were, in Western Australia, we all heard of Rottnest Islands. Aboriginal people built those prisons and they essentially died in them. But also, like, 10-year-old boys were locked up there and, were chained and sort of marched to those places as well. Yeah, like...
God, 10-year-olds in prison. Thank God we're not doing that anymore. Jesus, yeah, fuck.
You know what I mean? Like, it's crazy to think as well, like, them 10-year-olds that were getting locked up, or some of them were participating in sort of various forms of frontier conflict as well. But they understood what was happening and what was drastically changing in their, before their eyes as well. Just like their parents, they understood, the importance of sort of defending country as well. Then also, they were kidnapped and they were taken, and like the majority of conflict that initially started early on in sort of in different colonies and different pockets around the country started because of there was the ratio between men and women, and we know what happens in those early days. Women get kidnapped from older women to young women, and they're used as sex slaves as well. And this was a huge response from Aboriginal men and other Aboriginal mob in those days to sort of punish these people for doing these horrendous things.
Yeah,
it's interesting because this period of time is there's always a sort of thought that Aboriginal people just laid down and died, or just gave up, or we hear this thing like the country was settled in 1788, then federated in 1901, and then there was this huge gap with what happened in between.
Scene missing, like
yada yada yada, federation. Yeah, fucking hell.
Literally, and it's just that same old sort of tale. Victor that wins the war sort of tells the yarn. And a lot of the historians and researchers and people that I've had on the podcast told, like, you can't necessarily, there's no way to deny this history that these things have happened because they were written as they were happening, either in the newsletters or in the letters sent back to the families in England and stuff as well. Like the writing is there. You have conservative historians or even like politicians like John Howard sort of saying, nah, these things never happened, or Abbott or one of them saying, it was barren land. You know what I mean? Like there was bushland. I think he said, or Morrison saying there was no slavery in this country. You know what I mean? Like these things are written. The ships his ancestors rolled on had slaves in them. The first fleet had slaves, had military officers, as well as sort of, the first governor in Australia was a military officer as well. It was a very thought out process in regards to getting this continent.
Well, those are the kind of stories that you can hear on Bo's awesome podcast. If you haven't checked it out yet, please do. Frontier War Stories. BoSpearim.podbean.com is a link to go. We'll put the links in the show notes too if people want to listen to that pod. And are there any other ways that people can get involved with the kind of work that you're doing with war or what have you, Bo?
I guess just show up, really, and just not on Invasion Day. Like countless things happen, to black fellas throughout the year more often. True solidarity is showing up when it counts. Don't get me wrong, we love the solidarity on Invasion Day, and it's become sort of like a symbol of, it's become a thing where people want to come to this than rather go to the barbecue, and they question sort of that as well. And I'm sure that's sort of what happens in white households. I wouldn't have a clue if it does, but you know what I mean. Like they question that, you know what I mean, and so like we need those questions. To continue. If there's one thing that I can give away, it's starting to be comfortable being uncomfortable, with things that are happening in this country as well, especially to black fellas. Because, once we feel uncomfortable, then, we have a moment to sort of address sort of that uncomfortability and sort of see how we can engage with that feeling, and then, get involved in what's sort of happening in your local area. Depending on where you are, I'm sure there's blackfellas that are organising, that are keen to do some things. Get involved in local groups. Get involved in your local sort of activist groups in your area if they're around. Don't go to these bloody conspiracy theorists and end up on any watch list now.
Good advice.
Or end up trying to take over the embassy like these other clowns did.
Yeah. No, fantastic advice.
There's a fine line now. And there used to be. We used to, sort of know the conspiracy theorists and the rednecks. Now they're sort of merging into this sort of one weird sort of bubble, that, it's just blurring the lines. But anyways, definitely get involved on Invasion Day. If you are on social media and if you do support the sort of no side of things, definitely jump on there and, hashtag Treaty Before Voice, because we're definitely going to be making that call on the 26th of January.
Yeah. All right. Thanks, Boe. Great to have you on.
Thanks, mate.
Awesome. Thank you very much.
The people who see something horrible happen in the world, and they run to their social media, and they all write down the exact same thing. My thoughts and prayers. Do you know what that's worth? Fucking nothing. Fucking less than nothing. All you were doing is saying, don't forget about me today. Don't forget about me. Lots of crazy distractions in the news right now, but don't forget how sad I am.
If you can, please make sure that you get to an Invasion Day rally on Thursday. We'll chuck a link in the show notes to a list of Invasion Day rallies around the country. If you're not sure where, there's a local one. If you can't get to one, we'll also put the link in there to pay the rent. You can go check out Warriors of the Aboriginal Resistance. I think there's just chapters in Melbourne and Brisbane, as I understand it. There's a Facebook page. We'll chuck that in the show notes, as well as a link to Bo's podcast, Frontier War Story. So please check them all out. But make sure that you can get along to an Invasion Day rally and help out if you can. I don't know what other Greens do in other cities, but a lot of the time, for the last few years at least, the Greens in Queensland, in Brisbane, have run the barbecue for the Invasion Day rally in Meanjin. So there's lots of work to do, chopping fruit and onions and staffing the barbecue and filling up water and dropping things off and all that. That's probably happening in a lot of places around the country. So please get in touch with your local Greens and see how you can lend a hand.
Genuine question, because the Labor government just announced they're getting rid of the idea that you can't work on January 26th. I know there are companies who say we'll work on it and employees can change the public holiday to another day. Is it better to work on January 26th and reject the idea of it being a day of celebration, or take the day off and go along to an Invasion Day rally?
Take the day off and go to an Invasion Day rally. Is it better to, go to work, bad leftism, and desert First Nations, not stand in solidarity with First Nations people protesting genocide and, ongoing injustice so that you can work? No.
Well, I think the dream would be able to get paid, but then still go to the Invasion Day rally. If you can get money,
say you're working, but then go,
and then just fuck off. Yeah, I'm working from home today, and then you're out there in the rally protesting.
All right, sure.
That's good praxis. Rate and review the show on Apple Podcasts. Give us a 5-star review. We really want to grow the show and go fucking bonkers in 2023. Any help you can do that would be fantastic.
Baby. We want to go all the way.
6,000 patrons by December 31st.
Yeah, that's our target.
Email us to hello@seriousdangerpod.com anytime you like. Thank you, people. We love you. Bye.
Good to be back.
Serious Danger Australia.